Hello, everyone. It's great pleasure. Anthony and I had a very well received interview. I guess it was over the summer, and this is a wonderful follow up for the ICA. So to quickly introduce him, orchestrally he's been the associate principal clarinet of the Cincinnati Symphony. He was the principal of the Met, and he currently serves as the first African American principal of any instrument in the New York Philharmonic. And he's also active as an educator. He's on the faculty of the Curtis Institute. He's a faculty of the Juilliard School. He's the faculty of Bard College. And of course, some notable fun facts of his past. He played in the Obama inauguration. And of course, he has numerous musical and, I guess, for lack of a better word, human rights awards. He's active as a soloist, a chamber musician, and obviously human rights movements, et cetera, et cetera. And interestingly, he's also, which we'll talk about a little later, he's the artistic director for Juilliard's Music Advancement Program. So anyway, welcome, Anthony. So good to see you again.
Thanks for good to be here with you.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks. So listen, last time we were sort of in the height of the George Floyd situation and all your incredible movements back then, and it's so wonderful to see an evolution since then. But we're going to start first with a little bit of the clarinet side. I think it's impossible to not mention the social side to all that you've been doing, but I like to remember you're also a very accomplished clarinetist, so I wouldn't mind starting there if you don't mind. So
yeah, that's great.
Why don't you take us through your teachers and what you took from them, some of the qualities and the inspirations and the specific things that you took from them, and any mentors and role models. It doesn't have to be a clarinet, actually, are welcome along the way.
Okay, it's a fairly long list of people that really helped me out when I was coming up in Chicago. I grew up on the south side of Chicago, and it's such a great music town. And so the list of clarinet teachers, from my first clarinet teacher named Richard Dawkins, I think he was a jazz sax player in Chicago. I mean, sax, in Chicago, and I studied with him very briefly, and then studied with Stanley Davis, who was the second chair player of the Lyric Opera. Actually, he was one of my earliest teachers. From there, I went to the Merit School of Music and studied with David Tuttle, who had studied at Northwestern and who's still to this day a very successful freelancer and performer in Chicago. And David Tuttle and Merit School, they introduced me to, and this kind of is when everything kind of took off, is they introduced me to Larry Combs and Julie DeRoche up at DePaul. And through a program that they were running, I was able to get discounted lessons, and a lesson with Larry Combs every other week, and a lesson with Julie every week. And that's when everything kind of started to get a very, very serious, and
but before you go on, can you just in one sentence or two sentences, what kind of program was that actually?
So the Merit School of Music, where I was studying with David, was a community music program. It was designed to help kids that wouldn't normally have access to music, to classical music. It was a tuition-free program, which was really, especially, designed to help inner city kids and kids who really needed that, who maybe wouldn't have had the access to this kind of education otherwise. And it was a Saturday program. And through Merit, DePaul also had a community music program, but it was that it was mainly that I was introduced to just going up there for private lessons, and they had their own program running, but it was through the Merit School of Music that all of that happened.
Great, because you can see why I'm curious, because obviously you're involved now on the other end a little bit, and it's wonderful. I mean, what a great living example rather than, oh, imagine if we did this, we might get the next principal of the New York Philharmonic. We have one right now, and so I think that's really an interesting fact. Anyway, I'm sorry to interrupt. Please continue.
That's okay. Yeah.
Larry Combs and Julie DeRoche.
Yeah, and that was like when I was like 11, 12 years old, 12, 13, 14. And that was just an amazing time because, you know, just to keep telling the story, if you don't mind, about all of the teachers, the great teachers I had. You know, it was around the time I went to Interlochen Arts Camp for the first time. And I studied with Sidney Forrest for 2 years. 91 and 93, and I was, you know, 11, 12, 13, 14. And those were amazing summers, you know, where I just grew as a musician and changed so much, and like really understood what it was like to play in an orchestra and kind of audition and have challenges and things like this back in those days at Interlochen. And you know, so around the age of 14 or so, 15, I was looking to transfer schools, to change the environment, and I had been playing in youth orchestra, etc. And you know, then it was time. Oh, before I go on, one of the great mentors I had, besides the great conductors like Michael Morgan of the Chicago Youth Symphony that I had in Chicago, and Daniel Heggie. These are, you know, these are pro maestros, music directors now, you know, orchestras in the U.S. And you know, I also had a mentor named Barry Elmore who conducted this ensemble of kids from the South Side called Chicago Teen Ensemble. And Barry Elmore was a great mentor, and he arranged all of these pieces for this small group, a chamber group, but it was like orchestral pieces, classical pieces, jazz pieces, like all these beautiful works of music. And we would just go out and perform in churches around the city and in spaces. And this is, you know, when I was just, you know, kind of starting off at age 11, 12, 13 years old. And so that was just such an amazing thing for me to do as a young performer, as a young clarinet player. And from there, this is where the list of teachers really gets shorter, but it's very impactful in my life and my career.
Now you were looking to change schools primarily because you had now at this point decided you want to get extremely serious about music. Is that why?
Well, no, actually, my mom sensed that I wasn't having a great experience at my school. You know, I think I was definitely getting more serious with music, but around the same time, you know, seventh, eighth, ninth grade, you know, I was getting a lot of pressure, like to be cool, not to play music from kids at school, and probably I was getting bullied a little bit about that. And other things, you know, how kids can be at that age, you know. So, you know, she was like, we need to kind of go somewhere else. So there was another great school in Chicago. I was already at a great school, just not a music focused school, but one that had a very okay music program that I participated in, but I wasn't getting lessons there or anything like that. I was getting all of that outside of the school. And so along with University of Chicago lab schools where I, you know, tested into, and it was Interlochen Arts Academy, which is the school, which is the high school, the boarding school of the Interlochen Arts Camp. And so I got in there and I went up there to visit, and I was just like, this is where I want to be. And it just like, my life totally changed. You know, just first of all, to leave home at 15 or something to go to boarding school was so wild and crazy. And then to get to study with Richard Hawkins for those 2 years and be in that studio with these amazing clarinet players and amazing musicians and dancers and artists and writers and creators at Interlochen was just so rich. It was challenge, but it's just like I just grew so much as a person and a player, and being surrounded by young artists, you know, in the prime of their lives, kind of it was just a different kind of experience.
Exactly the opposite of the other situation, which was kind of getting you away from blossoming. This one carried you along with it.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there would have been, I could isolate different things, and it was probably just a couple kids that year that were giving me a hard time or something. And that school was great, but the environment every day I was in, the environment every single day, and then to be able to kind of go back to the dorm and practice for like 3 hours or 4 hours after school when you're still at school, like at a boarding school was like intense probably, but also really fun because I felt like I was just away at college.
Mm.
So that was really, really special. And Richard was young. I was I was probably like 15 and Richard Hawkins was 25.
Wow.
And so he was in the prime of his career too, like as a teacher, um as a player, as a kind of young scholar of music. And this is who we were getting to like hang out with every day and was our
Mm.
mentor. And that just like God, he was making mouthpieces at the time, of
Yeah.
course, and he was driving a cool car, but he knew all about orchestral playing and solos. And, he's just like, it was so great. Um, and we had an awesome studio with like Jerry Chai and Alexander Fitterstein and Brooks Tone, who's in Japan, and Sean McLaughlin, who's not in music anymore, but was an amazing clarinet player, and Heather Tone, and then it was just like Ramon Witkowski, the mouthpiece maker we
Yeah.
know and love. These were my classmates in that
Yeah.
studio, so it was very special, I think. And from there, um, the first year I was at Interlochen, because my brother was at Curtis, um, as a flute player, I auditioned to Curtis early. I didn't get in, my as a sophomore, but Donald Montanaro kind of said, you really should audition again. It'll be great. And I did my junior year in college, and I had taken classes in
But
Chicago.
your junior year of high school.
Yeah, my junior year of high school. Sorry.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, my junior year of high school. And I auditioned and I got in. And so I graduated early. I had taken classes at that other school in Chicago to allow me to have enough credits. And so that was the beginning of the beginning of my professional life. Yeah, and with Donald Montanaro for 4 years. And that was just really, really special. And all of these teachers are also, in a way, different. And yet they all have this, like, I feel like the common thread was that they're all such great um, masters of communicating a tradition of playing that they came from,
Mm.
and articulating that, and in different ways, and yet in the same kind of beautiful way. And so that it was just I was just so lucky when I think about like just the number of teachers and the quality of them, and how much care they all put in their teaching.
Mm.
And that's very, very I feel very grateful for that.
Do you as a obviously worked out for you as a performer and what they gave you, but you're quite a serious teacher as well. I mean, do you feel does that influence you? I mean,
Oh yeah.
yeah, in the way
Yeah.
you approach your students and so forth.
Yeah, I feel like I am passing down so much, and this is what all teachers do, right? I mean, yes, we have gone through our own learning and our own processes and our own kind of methods of learning, but so much of like what I am proud to pass on is a lot of the knowledge that was passed on to me from my teachers. And it's a really special thing, and I think it's something that I feel is a really important responsibility for me to do, is to honor their teaching by trying to live up to um, what they taught me and how they taught me and the traditions that were passed on to them. And I think that's an important part of like being in the community of clarinet players and the community of musicians is this sense of passing on to the next generation what you may have learned from some of your teachers.
Good. Um, I'm very interested in your orchestral career because you were the assistant principal and we had actually we've chatted a few times live, and I remember you were talking about a little bit of the differences. I mean, of the kind of repertoire you're playing in Cincinnati versus the Met versus the New York Phil. And I mean, you pretty much covered all the big all the big repertoire. Do you want to just talk very quickly to people who aren't that experienced at in orchestra? I mean, how did your role? How is it? What's the same and what's different about those three jobs in terms of your responsibilities?
Yeah, it is very interesting. I mean, I was lucky enough to join the Cincinnati Symphony as associate principal / E flat when I was 21 years old, and that was just intense enough without like overwhelming a young kid in his first job, because I got to play all of the concerti, a lot of the concertos with piano and violin and stuff as principal clarinet. But then I got to sit in the section with Richie Hawley as principal and with Pascual Martinez, my current colleague, as
Oh, I
second
didn't know that.
clarinet.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, his first year. Um, and Ron Offman on bass clarinet, who's still there, and these were such great mentors to be around, and I got to play with the great Bill Winstead on principal bassoon, and I can keep naming all of the great musicians in that orchestra. It's a fantastic orchestra, and it's a real pro serious musician, high quality orchestra. Everyone always says a world-class orchestra from whatever orchestra they're in, but in Cincinnati, for a smaller city, a city of its size, or for anywhere for that matter, it was such a great experience. So I got to have the high pressure, but I also like got to kind of take my time and listen to the orchestra from the audience, as an associate principal player, and I got to kind of appreciate the sound of the orchestra outside of it, because I didn't have to just just be like practicing like a madman the whole time without like being able to take it all in. Sometimes when you're thrown into those principal jobs, you are overwhelmed. Even as a older person, it can be overwhelming, the responsibilities that we have to do as principal players. So as a young kid, I mean, it was a great place for me to be, and I got to have some time to practice. I got to have some time to continue to learn and grow and play chamber music, which I love, without too much of the extra load. And
How long were you in that job?
I was there for 4 years.
Great.
Yeah, 4 years. And then, and the difference there, of course, I practiced a ton for the Met job. And once again, I had two opportunities to get into the Met. And I auditioned once for a 1-year position that I didn't win, while my third year in Cincinnati. And my fourth year, they had the permanent position, and I managed to get hired in that audition.
But by the way, Anthony, I just want to mention something. It's funny how my memory at my age works. But I like you, I didn't know him as well as you, but I knew the late great Jim Anyabene, and I remember talking to him after that audition. This was way before you were going to get there, and he says, "Yeah." He said, "There's this kid who he really played very musically." He mentioned it specifically. There's this kid he played very musically from Cincinnati. I guess it was like a quasi Nostradamus
Wow.
moment. But I just wanted to share that with you because obviously he did some wonderful tributes to him and stuff. Even collaborated with us. So I just wanted to share that with you very quickly and move on.
That's such a sweet story. That moving on to that experience. Um, you know, gosh, back and at the Met, I was 24 when I moved to, 24, 25 when I moved to New York and joined that great orchestra. And talk about just learning all around from such great musicians by just listening to them, not to mention the singers, but the musicians and the singers in the orchestra. Oh gosh, Jim being one of the greatest, in that orchestra. In that section, we actually, because we played so many concerts at the Met and there were so many performances at the Met, we got to play as I was principal, and Steve Williamson was principal as well, came in that year as well. Um, we got to play with everyone in the section. So I got to spend time playing with Jim. I got to spend time, of course, with Jessica Phillips. I got to spend time with lots of people who would come into the city and to sub with the orchestra and sub with us. And you just have to be so. The endurance factor for playing in the opera was something that takes a while to get used to.
Yeah, I do want to mention in one of our live meetings, we had just recorded the Ring Cycle, and I found it. I mean, just not having had your sort of career path, used to doing, oh my goodness, I have a half an hour symphony. This is terrible. All of a sudden, I was doing 6.5 hours with a mic on it, good to Dameron. And I said, Anthony, how do you keep the concentration during all that? And I remember your very profound response. You just do it.
It's true. It's true.
And you know what? That's what I had to do. And thanks for that.
Yeah, it's true. You don't think about it, and like especially when you're in the midst of it, it's like, look, time, and in those operas and all, time sometimes stands still. It's like there are things to do and things to listen to, and it's about, like, I think it's really kind of, you have to learn to be really mindful in a simple way about what you're doing. I am playing music and I'm listening to beautiful music, and there are beautiful things happening around me all the time. So you don't burn out. And there were times where you're just beat. I mean, you are just totally beat, physically, emotionally, spiritually, kind of beat down playing these operas, and day after day after day, and the amount of work that goes into that, the amount of dedication, and frankly the quality of the playing, day in, day out, night after night, day after day. I did that for 10 years. And the amount of learning that you get from the singers and the sound of the orchestra and the quality of the sound of that orchestra is just really very, very, very special.
So I'm actually curious. Like, I remember good to Denver, you're doing, I don't remember how, about an hour and 45 minutes, and then you play that big duet, and then you've got another few hours after that. But then I remember we were talking. Your very first time you did Capriccio Espagnol was with the New York Philharmonic. You just, oh yeah, right, yeah. So what is the difference? I mean, I can imagine all the difficulties that you just mentioned in the opera. You're still doing 2 minute solos after, but what is it, a different kind of pressure or excitement, or what is that like when you move over to the New York Philharmonic to do shorter programs?
Yeah, I mean, so backing up to some of the experiences I got at the Met is that, 3 times a year we would do a Carnegie concert with just the orchestra. And those experiences were very they were wonderful. They were after really intense rehearsal weeks too, and then double rehearsals the day of the concert, kind of. And that helped moving on to the New York Phil. But really the experience of the pressure, experiencing the pressure of, starting off a season having to play, like you mentioned, Capriccio Espagnol, where you are like, not only you're starting the piece, but you have solos throughout the piece. I mean, you know how this is, but it is striking how different it is that after being in the opera for 10 years, because, or being in any orchestra and playing the rep over and over again, 10 years or 20 years in, when you're doing some familiar Beethoven symphony or something, it feels different than if it were your first time doing it. And so when you go from a situation, and mine was at the Met, and you play almost every opera of the standard repertory, and Tosca, it feels like walking into always call it at the Met, kind of like walking into your living room and playing down into the pit. It feels so comfortable
Huh.
because you just know what it is, what it's like, and you don't have the bright lights shining like right on you. And you get to the Philharmonic. I got to the Philharmonic after many times auditioning for jobs at the Philharmonic, and after 6 years, where they were hiring and trying out other people, and then I finally end up and get my shot. They offered me the job, and this is my shot. It's like, okay, I have to record Nielsen Concerto this year. I have to play Capriccio. I probably played the Scheherazade. I had to play, Galante dances. I probably played like all the clarinet excerpts and Nielsen Concerto. That first year, and the list went on. It kept coming. They kept coming. The big pieces. It's like, oh, this is why I wanted to be in the Philharmonic. This is this is this is not only why I want it to be, but it's also what causes lots of stress, right? as you know, like this is.
Well,
But this,
I used to have more hair than you, Anthony, when I started.
right,
So that tells you
right.
something.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. And there's no, you can't kind of sneak back. It's like, okay, you play the Tosca solo, which is amazing, and then you get to kind of listen back and like let the singers and let the orchestra take over and do your other beautiful, you know and the solos just that keep coming and coming, and you realize, oh, you're the opera singer now, of the protagonist, one of the protagonists of the symphony, of the theater of Rachmaninoff or Sibelius or whatever. You are the soprano clarinetist of the orchestra. And yeah, that year was so high octane in so many different ways. And yet, when you step in there and you're living your dream, you have to kind of make a couple choices. You have to say, am I going to let the kind of feeling of pressure stop me from playing it at a really high level? Or am I going to use that as fuel to really just play like I've always played, maybe with a little bit of extra adrenaline, but to really step into this place um, that I feel like this position that I feel like I can do. And I had to pat myself on the back a lot. I had to like look in the mirror a lot and say, you can do this, you can do this. Because not only that, I was coming into a position historically that was really owned by Stanley Drucker. That was his orchestra for all of those years. And so I had to kind of understand that and respect that, but also kind of totally forget about it. I had to kind of like really just like focus on what I was trying to say musically every night, every day. And to know that I was like taking over from something that had been a legendary kind of position and a legendary player in the field. So
Wait,
that
sorry,
was a different thing.
I respect all these things that you say, but I'm actually curious. You're getting me nervous talking about it. So I mean, did you at times get a little, kind of out of your comfort zone? And I mean, I think there's a lot of accomplished musicians and starting out musicians. If so, how did you? I mean, intellectually, it sounds wonderful, but how did you actually, when it came time to do it, was there some more concrete way that you dealt with it that helped you?
No, I mean, I don't think there's like a silver bullet. I don't think there's like a specific thing that helps. I think it's really um, it's a focus of mind, of practice, but also of just acclimating to the heights, kind of. So if you're used to flying at a degree of of an altitude of a few 100,000 feet or something, and then you go to 30,000 feet, It's going to take a little while, but you know what it is? It's all about um, not panicking. It's about understanding, oh, this is actually, like I said, a lot of mental stuff I had to do. A lot of it. A lot of mental work.
Like what? That's why I
Yeah,
want
yeah.
exactly what you're talking
Like what? I mean, when I said at times I had to like actually look in the mirror every morning for weeks, maybe months, and say, you know, you're good enough. Just, you know, you belong here. You are prepared and you're a great musician. And then you walk away and you have breakfast and you go to work.
about.
You know, that kind of training, that kind of and also the breathing was so different at the Philharmonic than at the Met. So um, the amount of I remember being there in the lights at times and almost feeling like I was going to pass out a couple times early on because the rate of your breath, the heart rate, the adrenaline, all of that stuff made you have to think about how to be mindful more of like how you're breathing in the moment in the concert because it's so different than the Met, and you kind of had to acclimate to the light literally and like look learn where to look on stage and how to be comfortable in your chair and how to um not see the audience because the audience perspective from the pit orchestra to the beautiful large Metropolitan Opera, it's all red, it's calming, it's wonderful, it's beautiful, and then you get on the stage of a new hall, and maybe it's just any hall, any new orchestra, new situation, and it feels so different. You have to know how to focus on the real things, the music, and the other thing is you have to have confidence that you've worked on this stuff your entire life. That's where a lot of the strength came from in the moment, was that I have been preparing for this like my entire life. It's not like I hadn't practiced these things 1,000 times. It's just you have to adjust a little bit when you're there in the moment, and learn how to kind of really map out how to slow things down. Frankly, that's what it took a little while to do, is how to play things, how to actually slow things down more in the moment than you were used to doing. And that's just, everyone does that with performing and auditioning anyway. But I think in the orchestra for sure, when you're doing like Galanta dances or like Scheherazade, how do I slow my fingers down? Because they want to go like way faster than you think, you know. So that I spent a lot of time with that in my practice. Like, how do I map this out in my brain and my hands with my practice slowly so that when I'm out there, it doesn't go like um 0 to 95 or 0 to 100, because you know that feeling you go to 100, so you have to practice at like 40, 30. You know, you have to understand that that's going to happen, because the first time it happens it feels like you're in the fastest car in the road without your seatbelt, and it's a great ride, it's a great car, but you're like, this is very dangerous. This feels much more dangerous until you have to practice that though, like by um you know, just by a lot of a lot of thought.
Oh, I think superb, superb. I wouldn't call it advice, but just analysis of what you did. I think it's very helpful. I just want to share when you talked about looking in the mirror. I loved it because on one hand, I think a lot of people would call you a humble person, but actually another person, another African American who played in the New York Philharmonic, Jerome Ashby. Okay, he used to tell his students, never have, wait, what he said, never have a big ego except when you play.
Mhm.
And I loved it. No one needs to know, hey man, I'm telling myself I can do this. Okay. As soon as it comes down, people say, nice job. Oh, you're too kind. I
Right.
thought it was superb advice on many levels, just in
I
what's.
think I think that's a great um, way to word that. And you know, I met Jerome, and everybody should know he was associate principal horn of the New York Philharmonic for a very long time, and really just a role model for me. because I also had friends that studied with him and whose lives he affected and changed, and so I knew him a little bit as a young college student before he passed away, and he was that way. He was very humble, very like when you met him, when I met him, at least as a young student, he was very soft spoken, and to be a horn player up on the stage of the New York Philharmonic, you cannot shy away from stuff when you're in the heat of the battle, right? So he would know about that. Yeah.
Great. Um, Now, we dabbled in it a little bit. In typical fashion, I borrow from this and I get completely disorganized. But I would like to know. Obviously, you're so busy performing and you're teaching, but I want to know, what does teaching give you? Okay, we talked about what you try to do. What does it give to you personally, musically, all of the above, none of the above?
Oh gosh. I was teaching today, and I have to tell you, it's hard not to get emotional about this, but I've been teaching online, on my computer for this whole year, and I have a couple students that I've been with for a while that I miss, and but I know what they sound like. I know how they sound and what they react to in the room, and it's so frustrating not to be with them. And then I had a couple students that that even one or two of them I knew before and I'd seen and met, but a couple of them I'd never had a lesson with in the same room as them,
Wow.
and there's still a couple that I haven't. And just recently, over today and yesterday, I had two of my first in-person lessons,
Huh.
and I have to say, I almost cried, because the amount of there are a couple things. There is the personal energy that you get from hearing someone play in person. There's also a technical thing. There's a clarinet thing. There is a where you can hear the depth of the sound. You can hear the air going through the instrument. You can feel it vibrating in the room at the decibel level that you think it should. And oh, that needs to be like a lot more or a lot less. But it's also the connection that you can get when you're in the same room. Like either, and what happens is, and you were just to answer your question about what I get from teaching, is that I get wrapped up in the music. So and it just solidified why I love to teach, especially seeing these students for the first time after a year of just seeing them online, is that I learn so much about sound, about body, about technique by listening to my students and having thoughts about what might make this sound more like a great singer at the Met. I had that sound in my ear from all those years. And I've lucky enough to have played with great musicians and still do. And yet what I'm trying to do in that room is learn from the student that is also going through things that I went through as a young player, that I'm going through every day, and letting them know, oh, I am working on that too.
Mm-hmm.
This is what I'm working on now to try to get a warmer tone, or this is
Mm-hmm.
what I'm working on now to try to get a little more focus in my sound when it gets a little bit unfocused, or when I'm trying to like have a little bit more vibration in the tone, if it sounds a little bit too dull, or if I'm not using my air in the right way. Or this is what can help when I'm working on my articulation, and I've worked on trying to get a faster, more easy articulation. This is how I try to do that. And so part of like the idea of why it's wonderful to listen to other teachers give classes, master classes, is that I'm listening in the same way as a student, always, because the teacher can say something and the student can do something, or even the student can say something in realizing what the teacher said that is really fantastic for them and why it resonates with them. and then you
Mm.
can learn from that and become a better musician and a better player. And that is fantastic. And I just miss it so much. I missed it, like, especially hearing it in person and live after this year. I was like, there's the warmth and there's the beauty of a tone of a clarinet that is like, that cannot be replicated with the finest recording equipment, you know.
Mm.
and even though that can be nice as well, but yeah, just hearing that is like really, really very interesting.
Wow. Well, like, that takes me to the next question I'm very curious about. I mean, you mentioned Donald Montanaro, and it was the beginning of the beginning, and so forth. And now you've replaced him, quote, you know. And by the way, allow me, I lose track of all the variety of all your accolades. Didn't you just got some sort of title or something for teaching at Curtis? But so, first of all, I mean, you come here as this, you know, young punk. You got all this information from it. It must have been incredible years that your brother was there at the same time, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now you're teaching at Curtis. Yeah, you know, so I'm just really curious. I mean, and please tell us, just remind me of this accolade that you received recently there, and what it's like to sort of sit in the same chair that he sat, and the kids are sitting in the chair that you sat.
Yeah, it's pretty wonderful. And everyone, the people, they made, Curtis made a big press release out of it and this big announcement, and so much love from everyone and friends and stuff online. And it was interesting because I've been teaching at Curtis for like 7 years already, or
Wow.
six
Yeah.
6 years. So I've been the clarinet teacher and on the clarinet faculty member there for like many years now. And yet this was a very, very, very kind gesture, and it was my chair was officially endowed to be a titled endowed chair at the school by a wonderful, wonderful couple of supporters of the arts and supporters of Curtis. It's just a nice, nice title to have with the
What is the
with the
title?
chair. It's a newly created chair, and for me, and the William R. and Hyuna U. Brody Distinguished Chair. That's the name, and it was endowed to be held by a member of the Curtis faculty who brings distinction to the school through their musical art and pedagogy. They are recognizing me for my significant accomplishments, as they say
Wow.
in that area, and in the receipt of the chair, which I was very proud to receive. I made sure to mention Donald Montanaro as and how much of an honor this particular endowment of this chair is, because of his tutelage and my carrying on his tradition and the tradition of the other great line of clarinet teachers there. Tony Gigliotti was my woodwind quintet coach when I was at Curtis, Anthony
Huh.
Gigliotti. Um, and so, it's just really fantastic.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you.
Um, well, I mean, speaking of a more nitty gritty, I'm curious because obviously you've heard a lot of the young players and so forth. What are the general tendencies in the younger players that you're hearing nowadays? And if you teach, be it a master class or like you said, even in the audience, what are the what are those areas that you would gravitate to? Uh,
hmm
if there's such a thing as a rule, I understand everyone has strengths and weaknesses. Are you noticing general tendencies you'd like to change and that you seem to feel you can help with?
hmm Yeah, I think they're kind of ones that are probably have just been all around, for many, many years. Um, but I would say that the tendency is that everyone has gotten so great, that folks can just play everything. They can really just play technically everything, and with nice sound. They can just do it all. And so what I end up focusing on, even, and this is in different levels too. This is all throughout. You know, you can have even the younger generation or the younger kids that don't have as much experience, or at a different level than some of my students at the college level. You know, they also have tons of talent and tons of gifts technically. But you know, when it comes down to it, for me, it really is like, um, how do we create a phrase? And this is what I was taught by many of my teachers as well. But how do you express those things that maybe you can't express with words? And how do you do that through the clarinet? And how do you make the clarinet an extension of yourself, like in song, an extension of your voice as a musician? And how seriously do you take that? And can it be heard? And how do you put that in the sound? How do you, and I say that that's a tip of my hat to Donald Montanaro too. Putting something in the sound was one of his phrases. And how do you do that? You know, and that is something that I talk a lot about with the air in classes that you may see with me is, um, and you know, sometimes I get involved in the embouchure stuff, the technical stuff, these sorts of things. But I definitely skew toward talking about the artistic depth of one's playing, and how do we express that greatly, and how do we adapt our thinking um, to be able to play at our highest level. And so a lot of times I spend a lot of time in my lessons talking about the psychological aspects of performing, of playing an instrument, and being a great musician. And so some of the things you heard me talk about earlier, which is what kind of work I do with myself to try to
Mhm.
perform at a high level, is what I spend a lot of time talking to my students about. In addition to kind of how do we, you know, combine those two things? How do we focus on music, and how does that help our technique? You know, and is there a way that we can combine those two things, where just because we're talking about the music doesn't mean that we have to let everything else slide? You know, so it's really just about trying to do like a left brain, right brain kind of on the clarinet brain, um, a kind of let's see, a melding of those minds, you know, and how do we make that more whole? So when we are practicing orchestra excerpts, and trying to make them in tune and have good technique with a nice tone and good articulation, yes, we are talking about all of these little technical details. And so we work on that. But then we also work on, okay, you've done all of that thing, you've dotted all of those I's and crossed all of those T's, but are you playing the music? You know, are you playing the piece? And some of that experience is from like listening to orchestra auditions and participating in them myself and practicing my entire life. Is like, part of performing well in an audition is actually knowing that what you're doing is trying to make a real statement, and you're trying to move people. You need to do things well in order to do that as well. But you know, that is the ultimate goal. So it's the combination of that, the technical with the artistic, and the ratio of those, and how we get to the ideal ratio for your peak level of performance.
Very good. Um, I remember, Anthony. We had our own really terrific interview, and I've watched so many of yours, so I can't remember where I hear these things anymore. So forgive me on those. But I do remember it was really fascinating during, you know, COVID. I mean, we're still in it, but at one point you said you've been contemplating recently the role of a musician in society. I mean, I thought that was terrific. Yeah, you know, everyone's so into, I think in every job in their life, you know, they're just trying to put bread on the table and they're running to the next thing. You know, how often did we just sort of step back and ask the most obvious questions and we're stumped? So have you come to a conclusion?
No, I haven't come to a conclusion, but I have thoughts about it, and I think they're serious ones, actually. Like I think that as individuals, that role can shift, and it can mean very different things for very different people. So, but what I think that the capacity that our capacity for giving the gift of music to people in the world is a very, very important responsibility, right? As kind of communicators to the world. There's a there are a lot of bad things that go on in the world, right? And one of the most beautiful, wonderful things that you can do in the world is to put out beautiful things day in, day out, 24/7 as a life vocation, to the universe, to the earth, to your friends, family, audience members, students, neighbors, teachers. You're putting out, that's what our jobs are as artists, is to recreate or create um, interesting, um, unharmful things for the world, you know, and for humanity. And so that's a pretty lofty thing here. It's not just like, yeah, we're clocking in, we're playing the clarinet, we're blowing through it, and like that's nice. They pay us for that or something, if we're lucky. I think there's something greater going on here. And I think over the last year, I have contemplated this, not to find a solution or not to find an answer, but to the searching for meaning in the process of being a musician is something that is actually um, a very, very, very important thing.
Hmm.
The search for meaning.
Hmm.
Um, there's a very famous book, I think, with that
Yeah.
title.
Yeah. Man's Search for Meaning.
Yeah,
Victor
yeah,
Frankl, wonderful book. Yes.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And I think in a similar way, some of our responsibility as artists is something greater like that, to add beauty to the world when there is a lot of times, and there are in a lot of places and corners of Earth, this little tiny planet world that we know can be so terribly ugly.
Yeah.
Um,
And along the lines of what you're saying, let's not forget uh, the power of music also can be negative. Yeah, yeah, it can also influence people in negative, and that's actually also very important, I think, to remember. Yeah, which path are you going to take? You know.
right, right.
Um, now we're going to move a little bit. We're just getting now into the other side. In fact, I'm going to ask you this awful question. What am I supposed to call you? Are you a humanitarian? Are you a social activist? I always have a different word for you, and I think I know I'm not quite hitting the mark. All of the above, none of the above.
I think, yeah, you can call me whatever you would like. I mean, honestly, well, as long as it's not a bad name,
Yeah.
and you can do that too, I guess. I have zero control over what you say, or anyone else for that matter. But I think what I'm just doing is trying to be thoughtful and helpful, and for myself as well, but as maybe others or whoever would like to listen, not just, of course, to my clarinet playing, but to listen to my perspective on frankly just humanitarian issues and life issues, that are going on. And so it is not to try to necessarily steer things in a particular way, but also just to like bring awareness to things, and to help maybe myself and others maybe understand what's going on with certain things in the world. And so that has been obviously amplified this past year, because I wasn't spending as much time just playing the clarinet. We were all in front of our computers and like had these outlets and interviews and talks and things, being able to reach people via online, to be able to express to people like what we care about, as people. So however you want to put that in writing or down on the record, that's what I'm, doing.
Well, I'm gonna skip right again. I have all these notes, but I can't help it now. Remind me your daughter's age.
4.5.
I'm fascinated. Okay, I mean, first of all, it's already weird that when daddy's a musician. Okay, that is a reasonably high profile musician in the city. That's already a little bit. It takes a little explaining, but first of all, as you said, there's been a lot of bad things happening in the world, but let's talk specifically about your your Take Two Knees movement and all this kind of stuff. I mean, there's some seriously brutal stuff that's happened this year and obviously before. How do you explain this now? We're not even talking about your students. We're talking about your daughter, your role model, young girl. I mean, I think I'm gonna love this answer because you have to simplify it. Why are people doing this to certain people? And what's daddy trying to do? And what has he been doing? I mean, surely she's noticing things like, you're having interviews with all these weird people and whatnot. How do you explain this?
Well, yeah, it's a little bit early, for her, but what it is important to actually to put it in simple terms, like you say. And what I would break it down to are a couple different things. It does matter what your values are and what your beliefs are, right? That actually does matter. So if one believes that that all people deserve the right to live out their brief lives on this earth with some of the same rights that we may have, that you may have, that we all have an equal capacity for being able to, within reason, to be able to live our lives as we would like, as long as we're not harming each other, as long as we're not harming other people, and as long as we're not infringing on someone else, and their right to the same thing. And when people's rights are taken away because they may look different, like, if I talk to my young daughter, because daddy's skin is darker than this other person's skin, some of those people may do bad things to them that don't allow them to live their lives in the same way that you may be lucky to live your life. And this is simply something that people like to say, politicize different things. But if you kind of put it in simple terms, that are complex, of course, I think that's better, because people can say, this whole concept of treating others like you would like to be treated is a simple golden rule, right? That we all know and we learn this. Do we really believe that's true? And do we see, when we see people where that's not happening in their lives for whatever reason, maybe we should say something about it and try to help those people. And so simply it's that. It's to say that maybe we can help those other people.
And you talk a little more in depth about what you specifically have been doing, because obviously it's become reasonably high profile.
Yeah. So, after so many different circumstances last year, with the death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and all of these things kind of hitting ahead, and us being at home, and like, and as musicians being kind of silenced as well, I wanted to speak out against, this kind of racial violence, and obviously my experience as a Black man, I was taking it from that experience in America, is like, that is a real problem that we have, just kind of violence that goes, on, that is, how should I say, people are often unaware of it, and then it would come to the forefront, like no change happens. These things keep happening over and over and over again. And so I felt that, it was a self-expression of like, what can I do as a musician to say something against it, to tell the world what I believe about this, and to have people try to join me in that, and to use their voices and their power and their individual voice in your community to try to make changes. And so that's how I started this to take two knees movement, to try to get people to join me in, using their power, usually their voices as musicians and artists, to also speak about injustice and speak up for others that may be voiceless, or that may need us to all stand by them, to create a consciousness of change, which is very difficult to do without reaching hearts first, And so I think part of our roles can be, as musicians, vehicles for that sort of change, and that sort of movement of consciousness through our art forms. And so, last summer, as you know, I started this viral movement of people making videos and making statements online, um, and some, not necessarily directly related to that movement. A lot of arts organizations and musical organizations started kind of taking a stand as well on social media and on their platforms for change. But also, we did a fundraiser for the Equal Justice Initiative, through Take Two Knees, and as you know, and you generously donated to an organization that is really doing real work to like kind of bring attention to kind of some of the atrocities that happened in the U.S. in our history, to Black people, and to support the work of lawyers that are trying to get unjustly convicted people off of death row, and to get voting rights to be available for everyone still. And these kind of organizations are doing this work. So we did a fundraiser where I gave some money and others gave money to the Equal Justice Initiative to support that. So, and I'm going to try to continue this work of this concept of Take Two Knees, because I think it's very important to try to use my platform. I am in this platform because of my clarinet playing and because of my musicianship and my reputation in that way. But also, I interact with a lot of different people, very important people in the music world, and have that I'm sitting here talking to you because of those connections with people like you, and the ICA, and all of these connections that we all have. And so, I'm trying to do my little part to bring awareness to it, and hopefully encourage all of us to try to see what we can do. I don't have all the answers for all the solutions, but I think we can all think about it collectively to try to put some action behind our thoughts about what we can do.
I'd like to observe, since COVID started, I've been following some of your interviews. I've been involved myself, and it's wonderful to see two things. You can map your story to identify history, and you can actually map history. I mean, within reason, I get, in how you've shaped it. So, for example, the first interview I saw with you was with Richard Hawkins, who you mentioned before. Before all this George Floyd stuff. Now, that was an incredibly different interview, let's say, than mine that you had with me just a few months later. But now, right, a few months later again, you can see how it's all evolved. And even I can see how your analysis has changed. Because I remember asking this question in our interview, what are you trying to do with all this? And you were still trying to find your own clarity, it seemed. And now it's well thought out, very well identified. And what I'm very happy about is I was worried that this would just be a fun little phase or something for a few weeks, and okay, too bad, move on to the next one. But now look, you've won the Avery Fisher Prize. You know, you've given some of that money to your I don't want to say your organization, Juilliard's organization, MAP, that you're heavily involved with, and things are progressing. So I really enjoy. I mean, if anyone wants to, I would follow Anthony's path literally this year, because it's really remarkable. It's a remarkable identification point of what happened this year, and how Anthony actually had influence over that. So, you know, thanks for congratulations on that one. Why don't we talk about MAP? In fact, I'm going to ask you some very basic questions, okay? Because you've been so good now at taking these complex things and trying to simplify them. So, you know, is there an underrepresentation of certain groups on stage and off stage in the audience? And I mean, what do you think are some, if so, and if this is a problem, let's say, what do you think would remedy it? What directions can we do? What can we do about this? How are we actually going to make a difference? So people complain all the time. Okay, how would you solve it?
Yeah, I mean, you know, you have to look. First of all, you have to identify that there is an issue, right? And so that's very obvious. For instance, do our orchestras, just specifically in America, do our orchestras in cities in America look like our communities? And if they don't, first of all, if you don't think that's a problem, that's one issue, right? If you do think that it is an issue, and usually when you find out about the history of music in America and the history of classical music in America, and do a little bit of research about that, you understand that a lot of that comes from the history of segregation, the history of discrimination. And not that people did not want to play music that were of darker complexion, because then you understand like the birth of jazz. You understand the birth of American jazz music and where that came from, and how that thrived when musicians were turned away and there were segregated unions in most American cities for Blacks and for whites. And so you understand that history, and then you can say, oh, okay, now I see that that's part of where this kind of more homogenous thing came from. Besides the fact that a lot of this music, you know, of course, hundreds of years ago came from Europe, Northern Europe. That's the obvious part. The less obvious part is why there's not very much diversity on stages. And so in thinking about that, and let's say one acknowledges that that's a problem, and you understand the history of racism, and you do all of that kind of work, or obvious, you know, or you know it because it's obvious. Then you say, okay, you acknowledge the problem. Then you say, as if you're an individual or if you're an organization, it's very different. If you're an organization, then you can say, what have we done? What can we do better? So how do we run our auditions? And do our auditions based on old ways of thinking about who should show up? Should we, you know, are auditions biased toward people that look like us only, specifically, and people that only study with people that look like us? Are systems of evaluating musicians to be based on solely the playing of one or two pieces or five pieces by a certain player in a certain way? Do they bias that orchestra or that organization to certain types of playing, so certain types of players? And is that a system, or is it really like a system like basketball, where you know if the ball goes in or if it doesn't? Or is it more subjective, which music does? And how does that lean? I mean, that's at one level. So examining the audition process, examining the culture of orchestras in the world and in America. and what that does for people that are maybe trying to break into the field. But then you go younger. You go, okay, so what happens to the kids that start off and they're lucky enough to get music? What happens to those folks? Are they having experiences that keep them off of the stage? And so you dive into the educational part and that piece. And is there a culture within those institutions that prevent or have create barriers of entry for young people of different colors and races to enter the field? Are they, or is the existence that we are realizing now knowledge, power, programming? So have we been a part of the tradition that I grew up in, as you did, of only thinking that there were only pieces written by certain men of a certain color, and that no other pieces existed of by any other composers throughout all of time that might be worthy of our consideration by females, by blacks, by other Asians, by other people. And what the answer to that is actually no. We, there are instances of that kind of greatness that exists all over society, all over the world. And that realization is a very powerful one. So that's one that we can all go on our journey to say, oh, um, maybe I should branch out. Maybe I should ask those questions next time I'm given the opportunity to do so. Um, and the list goes on. There's not enough time to really dive into all the different layers of this. But one thing you can do is to first identify there's a problem, then try to find strategies for changing behavior within the culture of your organization, to maybe create pathways for the type of diversity that one would want.
So it sounds like you don't really have, a very concrete answer. It's kind of like your question, your situation before about it's the journey, it's the balance kind of thing, and this needs to be tweaked, and every organization has their own way maybe that they can contribute, every person, and so far. If I get this right.
Well, yeah, you have to ask a very specific question as far as like, are we talking about as individuals trying to shape stages? Are we talking about what kind of decisions you make as an executive director of an orchestra, as a music director of an orchestra, or if you're an artistic, like how would you go about that? That is very, very particular. And one is to actually think about the problem and say, we want to set goals for yourself. Like, what are your goals? You can't make changes if you don't have goals. So that's one simple thing. And that is at every single level that we talk about. So I think it's very important to like, to, when you're talking about a general question, um, to have, how should I say, to have a thoughtful answer about some of those things. So you could dive into, okay, how do you get more kids into a conservatory program or something like that? And then you could talk about training early on, and you can talk about these things. But yeah, I think it's quite a bit more nuanced than people may think. Um, but a couple of the things I mentioned are pretty good starting points.
Mm. What I like about this is, before we were taking kind of complex issues and simplifying it, and now we're taking an issue that I think sometimes is very simplified, and you say, "Wait a minute, maybe it's a little bit more, as you say, nuanced or complex than that." Okay, well, in typical fashion, we could probably go on way too long, so I'm gonna try to curb some of it. Let's talk more about you and how this all applies. Just let us know. Do you have any recent projects that have been very close to your heart? And I know you have some future projects. So why don't you just, if there's anything in particular that you want the world to know about, let us know right now.
Great. Yeah, there have been quite a few really great things going on, actually. So recently, I did a project at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City with the Catalyst Quartet. Oh, and prior to that, we released an album, and I recorded with them. They have a series called Uncovered of albums they're going to release of composers um, of color. Samuel Coleridge Taylor's Clarinet Quintet is the piece we played on this album. It's a gorgeous piece. Um, and we did a project there with a world premiere of Richard Danielpour's piece Four Angels for clarinet and strings. And this piece was dedicated to the four girls that were killed in the bombing in the church in Birmingham, Alabama, in 1963. It was a hate crime by members of the KKK, and he wrote this stunningly gorgeous, heart wrenching work for this, and we did it in front of a piece of art in the gallery that I chose in a gallery at the museum by James Kerry James Marshall, who was also from Alabama and as a Black American artist. Uh, and I just love this work, and so we did that, um, and the Coleridge Taylor, and I played a piece by Adolphus Hale Stork, Three Smiles for Tracy, in a different part of this gallery, and so I'm really proud of that. Um, and I have other projects brewing, a lot of online work that you can find and search, and you can find some of that on the YouTube channel and Instagram and stuff. But I'm premiering a trio by James Lee III, and I actually also premiered his, also an African American composer. I premiered his clarinet quintet, which is fantastic. I also just did a stream of Valerie Coleman's clarinet quintet as well, which is based on the life of Muhammad Ali. So that's awesome. And I may have a project where I do some of that work. And another premiere of a trio that is going to be in a concert at the 92nd Street Y in May, by James Lee III, of a trio for clarinet, soprano, and piano. And I'm going to kind of play that alongside Schubert's Shepherd on the Rock. So those are just a few. And in the fall, I'm going to release an album, and it's going to have Brahms and Weber on it as well. And that's
What quintets?
Oh, sorry. No, I recorded the quintet with Pacifica years ago and Mozart, but it's going to have the sonatas and the Weber Grand Duo
Great.
Concertant. Yeah. So, and
And
I've really,
who's the pianist?
the pianist is Gloria Chien, and we've been dreaming of doing this particular recording since we started working together. I don't know, maybe 10 years ago or something. And so we got an opportunity because both of us were, like everyone else this last year, just at home more. And so we just finally said, it's now or never, for us to get together and do this. And so really excited about that.
Great. I remember, again, all the interviews run together with me, but I'm just looking at you now, the way things have been going. You had started quite slow at the very beginning of COVID. Now you're a bit nuts. But I remember you mentioned your brother before, who's a flutist. He gave some very good advice once. He said, you need to know when to sit down on the sofa, and you need to know when to get off. Have you been a good boy, Anthony? Have you been following Big Brothers?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, well, one thing, I'm in a comfortable chair. I'm in a more comfortable chair for this interview because this is where I've lived my life. So no, I would love to just sit on the couch and do nothing too. But you know what? Some of it has been a part of, like, you're saying I'm leading this thing, but sometimes when life takes you on the path, frankly, you just go with it. And so, as much as, like, you're right, I've been very, very, very tired for a long period of time over the last year because I have been giving a lot, but I'm not going to complain about that, because I feel like in a way it's a gift, even though it has been hard. And the gift has been, I've also been able to be home with my family and still connect with students all over the world, and do some performing, which people weren't doing, and recording with great musicians still. So that's a gift that I can't complain about, because that's why I'm a musician. This is why I would be kidding myself if and so to be able to do that and also be at home, and that's been stressful in its own right. But yeah, it was very slow at the beginning and very not slow now. But I will get there. I will take some time for myself at some point and reevaluate and kind of think about where a year ago today, where I was and where I am now. And I'm just honestly also, I'm happy to be alive here, talking to you. I mean, so many people lost so many people close to them over the past year. And I have friends who have lost close people to them. And so I'm just happy to be here and be breathing with you, talking to you, so that's kind of where I am with all of that.
Actually, to me, it sounds like you have been following your brother's advice. Know when to go in the sofa, and know when not to. So, like, I think it sounds perfect. So we're going to wrap this up. But I think perhaps with a very important question, I'd like to know. You can tie this in or whatever. What advice would you give to your 20-year-old self? And or generally to young people today. I mean, we've talked about your humanitarian side. We've talked about COVID and how that's been affecting society and the music world. We've talked about, obviously, your clarinet side. So what would you do different? What would you tell your 20-year-old self? And what would you tell young people worldwide in general?
I would tell myself, and I would tell young people, there are a couple things. I would say imagine what you want. Okay? So that's what I mean when people talk about what they mean. I think when they talk about goal setting, right? But imagine what you want in life. Imagine what you would like. That's the first thing. The second thing is to just take care of yourself, to be able to um, in order to work, in order to like try, in order to strive for things, to answer that question number one, what do you want, what would you like, what do you imagine, you need to kind of be in a okay place, you know mentally and physically, to be able to do that. And so this whole year, it's for me, it's been about how am I taking care of myself? How do we take care of each other? How do we take care of ourselves so we can be in a place where we can uh, breathe better and sing better and create more? And so that's kind of like a part of like what I've been doing since for a long time, which is trying to work on the mental stuff, like trying to be healthier so I can kind of continue to do this kind of work, because this is not, none of this stuff is easy. Life isn't easy, and it throws really crazy things at you. So, that you'll be okay. That's what I would also say, that if you take care of yourself and you try to do healthy, happy things for yourself, then you'll be okay, because then you can show up again and again for whatever it is that you imagine that you want. And that can be little, you can take little steps to get you to big places. That's a third thing I would say, is that to get to number one again, is that don't expect there to be large outsized jumps in everything that you do. Look for the little steps and the little movements and the little goals, those little moments of stepping your way to those things that you're imagining, and to go on that path. To get yourself carried on that path that may be rocky. It might be a little bit bumpy, But if you go on the little step here and little step there and don't get discouraged by every little bump down that life throws at you, you will get closer to that place that you imagine, and that moment that you dream of. Um, and know that you're being true to whatever your path, wherever your path will take you. Fourth, I think it's important to keep your ears open and your eyes open and aware, so you don't miss anything. And what do I mean by that? I mean that sometimes our journey happens because we might have made a decision here or there that might be a small decision, but that affects everything that comes after that. So be aware of and listen to what's happening around you. Look at what's going on around you and how you're interacting with your world. Because often when you are more aware and you're listening to others and you're maybe kinder and gentler to yourself and hardworking and passionate and sensitive to what's going on and how you're saying things and how other people are saying things to you, you can create a path that is that you won't miss as much, if you know what I mean. And I think sometimes when we get distracted or unhealthy or too tired to just do it, we miss the things that might be a great opportunity because we just can't hear, we can't see, and we can't be aware of that opportunity for what it is. You know, we turn away from it, and really it could be a great opportunity.
Wonderful. Anthony, wonderful to connect with you again. Wonderful to see the evolution of, I mean, it's literally been just over a year, and I can't wait to see what's, a year from today, what, all this stuff that you've added to the world and how you've moved along and all that. So,
and you as well, Andy. I mean, I've seen some of the newer videos as well, and I just it's just great to kind of talk to you again. Hope to see you again soon.
Thanks so much, Anthony. So all the best, and when it's time, take your brother's advice.
Yeah, thanks. I'll try.
All the best, Anthony. Take care.
Great. Thanks. Okay. Bye.